What if everything we've been told about preparing our kids for college and careers is based on a model that no longer exists? I'm Dr. Melanie Wilson, and this is the Homeschool Sanity Show, where my guests and I share wisdom for making the homeschool journey a happy one for you and your kids. Today, I'm talking with Jonathan Brush, CEO and president of Unbound, and he's about to challenge everything you think you know about post-high school education. Jonathan is a homeschool graduate himself who spent 11 years as director of admissions at a traditional liberal arts college. But he had a crisis of conscience when he realized he was asking young people to make big decisions that didn't actually prepare them for the real world. The turning point? When his 11-year-old daughter opened the door one day and he thought, I wouldn't send her to the college where I'm working. Now, as a father of 8, 4 graduated, 4 still homeschooling, Jonathan has developed a completely different approach to post-high school education, one built on questions instead of answers, on real-world projects instead of simulations, and on learning to thrive instead of chasing fame, fortune, or power. In this conversation, we tackle some big questions. Why is the traditional college model broken? How has technology fundamentally changed what it means to be educated? And what does it actually look like to prepare young adults for a world where the jobs they'll hold don't even exist yet? Here's what you need to know before we dive in. This isn't just about an alternative to college. It's about rethinking how we define success, how we approach learning, and how we equip the next generation to navigate an uncertain world with confidence and purpose. Let's talk with Jonathan Brush. Jonathan, I am so excited to have you here on the Homeschool Sanity Show today. Before we dive into our topic, though, I would love to have you tell us more about you and your family.
Well, I'm honored to be here, and there seems to be like a little bit of irony for me to be in a homeschool sanity show. I'm not so sure that I've practiced a lot of homeschool sanity in my life, but I'm a homeschool graduate, so as your audience will be able to tell because of my social awkwardness here in a second. And I went to college. When I graduated from college, I wasn't sure what I was going to do next, but I did have a wedding date. So as far as I was concerned, college was a smashing success. And I married the only other homeschool person that was attending college at the time. So everything worked out great from that side. And we now have 8 children, 4 of whom have graduated, 4 of whom are still in it. So there's a lot of homeschooling insanity in that. They are indeed homeschooled. And then I get to be the CEO and president of Unbound, which is the coolest job I've ever held. And I get to work with a lot of students, including a lot of homeschool students. And I get to live in Virginia, which has been like living in Antarctica for the last 3 weeks. But as we speak, it says it's crossed 70 degrees, which probably means that the thermometer's in the sun, but I'll take it. I don't care if it is cheating. So.
Right. Oh, I know. I think we're all really wanting spring as we record this in late February. Okay, so I'm just really fascinated by your story. So after spending years working in admissions
Mhm.
at a traditional liberal arts college, which is what I attended, what was the moment or experience that made you realize that this model, this traditional college model, was not serving students the way that it should?
Yeah, I always want to be a little cautious about the way I say this because I can get really wound up about it. So we'll try for the sake of time and to keep myself in rein here.
Mhm.
But first of all, I was the first homeschool student that attended the college I went to, and I had a great experience. So that's worth mentioning. Um, I had such a good experience that, as I mentioned, I had a wedding date, but no job. So when the admissions office said, "Hey, would you like to be an admissions counselor?" I was like, "I don't know what that is, but yes, if it has a salary, I'm good with that." So I went to work for the college I graduated from. And the second year I was working there, I got promoted to be the youngest director of admissions in the state of Virginia, which was really cool. And it sounds neat. It also meant that they were probably either desperate or crazy. But I did get a really unique view of education coming from non-traditional education from the homeschool world into a traditional sort of education environment. And ultimately, I spent about 11 years as the director of admissions, and so it was a private selective liberal arts college. So it's worth noting that I had a great team and a great experience there. But here was where the crisis came. I started, and I think this is where my homeschooling background helped. It gave me that kind of ability to ask those critical questions. And instead of just saying, well, this is the way it is, go, well, I mean, when you question schooling and decide to do it yourself, yeah, you start to question everything and go, I don't know about this. And I started thinking, boy, I think I'm making a living asking people to make a bad financial decision because I have
Mm.
students who come here and are borrowing at the time $75,000. Of course, they borrow a lot more now,
Mhm.
and they want to be high school music teachers. And I'm like, math was not my favorite subject, but I'm just looking at those numbers and going, I don't think they pencil out. And so that
Mhm.
that was the kind of warning note, right? And then secondly, I was like, I don't think college is delivering what people think it's delivering. They think it's an adult making machine. They're not interested in doing that at all. Or it's a get a job card. They're not interested in that at all. So professors are saying, I'm not here to teach you how to be an adult. I'm here to teach you ancient literature. And I'm not here to get you a job. I'm here to help you pass your class. If you want a
Mhm.
job, go to the Career Center. And the Career Center was like, let me help you edit a Microsoft Word program for your resume. And this is, and I'm not belittling those people. It's just that
Mhm.
that colleges, which were supposed to be academic institutions, now were marketing themselves as adult making machines to help you get a job, but they hadn't restructured to do that.
Mm.
And then the final point for me was that I was watching education be extremely aggressive towards any kind of traditional Christianity. And I didn't mind a critical thinking bend or being able to question one's faith and think about it from a critical perspective. That was fine. I did resent the absolute agenda of destruction that I was witnessing on college campuses. And so all that came to a head when I came home and my then 11-year-old daughter opened the door and I thought, I don't want her to go to the college where I'm working. And I thought, well,
Mm.
she didn't have to go to my college, but I can't make a living asking other people to come to this college if I want to send my own daughter here. And that led
Mm.
me on a journey that wound up at Unbound. But that was the genesis of the crisis.
Wow. I mean, yeah, that is really there is so much that I could ask you follow-up questions about with that, but I'm afraid we wouldn't come back
We'd
to
become Joe Rogan. You'd have a 4-hour show. Yeah. So-
yeah, I wouldn't mind some aspects of Joe Rogan's,
That's right.
podcast for sure, but maybe that one would not work for our audience who is listening. So, I'm just gonna go right from that really remarkable incident in your life that prompted a change to asking you about decision making.
Mhm.
You have said that the current model of education after high school forces these young, inexperienced people to make decisions that have huge consequences attached. And I have had kids who have struggled with those kinds of decisions as well. So, why is the decision making paradigm that we have so broken? And how does Unbound's approach help students navigate that in a healthier way? So go ahead and tell us more about Unbound.
Yeah, so strap in. I'll ask you, your audience to buckle their seatbelts here because I have a particular passion about this, having had this experience myself. But then for 26 plus years now, 27 probably, watching young adults struggle with this in a way that I think is very frustrating because I think it's unnecessary.
Mm.
And I don't, just to be clear, I don't think there's any villains here. I don't. In fact, I think most people are well intended, but I think they haven't done the service of sort of stepping back and thinking about this a little bit. So first, it's worth it to recognize an historical precedent, and there's a good and bad here. If you push back a generation or two, you could make decisions early because there's only 4 or 5 decisions to make, right? You were going to stay on the farm, you were going to become a merchant, or you were going to be one of those rare people that went to college and put you in a different set of professional categories. And so making those decisions did have implications because it meant a major, I'm going to leave home, I'm not going to leave home, I'm going to try to get to college, right? Now, one of the advantages, we do have what looks like unlimited opportunity. Now, I don't believe it's unlimited, and I think that's a good thing. We're not God, so we can only do
Mhm.
certain things. But we certainly have many more options than we did before. And in some ways, there's a golden age of options, particularly from an educational standpoint. So it's worth noting that that's a good thing. But what has happened is we have these two things, like those two realities haven't met each other yet. And so we have well intended adults telling young people, hey, you need to make a decision by 16 or 18 about how you're going to retire at 65. And they don't always explicitly state that, but they almost always
Mhm.
implicitly state that. And so I don't think it's unreasonable then for us to, we have to understand if you're a 16, 18-year-old going, wow, I'm not even really sure how the world works. Not because I'm naive, not because I'm a dumb, whatever generation you don't like here, just because, every year something new has happened to me since 12. I mean, like everything's happening. And now I've got these people saying, hey, you have to make some massive decisions. And I don't know that I have the context to make any of those decisions, especially when it looks like I can do anything. So if I can do anything, then it's not just I need to feed my family or survive. I want to do something with meaning and purpose that makes me happy and fulfills me. So there's all this freight attached to this thing. And now you're asking to make that decision. And I just tell people, look, if you haven't been around the sun many times, that's a crazy thing to ask you to do. And so
Mm.
I don't think that that's necessary. And I don't think the reality reflects that in the sense that, you know, I'm now no longer contemporary in terms of my college experience. But even when I went to college, I ended up doing a job when I graduated from college that I didn't know existed before I went to college. I left that for a job that didn't exist and couldn't have existed when I graduated from college. And every job I've taken since then was the first time anybody had held that job.
Mm.
Now, my experience is unique to me, but my overall experience is not unique to people living in an AI technology driven world where, you have this creative destruction happening all the time. So how is it that we then tell a young person, hey, make a decision what we're going to do at 65? By the way, AI is going to destroy everything you know in terms of how you do jobs. And then you're like, why are you stressed out? Just calm down. It's fine.
Yeah.
And I think that those things are just sort of really kind of crazy. And I think that, what I want to convey to adults and young adults and what we do in Unbound is we say, look, let's take a deep breath. First of all, let's just embrace the fact that you live in a really cool time. I mean, yes, there's challenges. Every age has challenges. You don't get to live in a perfect world. You live in a broken world. But there's a lot of beauty and opportunity here. What an exciting time to be alive. Second, next couple of years is going to be wild. I mean, like you think things changed a lot before, things are going to change even bigger, and you get to be in charge of some of those changes. That's really cool.
Mm. Yeah.
No, if you know what you want to do, I probably don't believe you. But if you know what you want to do, that's fine. And so, lean into that as a gift from God. But if you don't know what you want to do, congratulations, you're paying attention. You don't have to figure out what you're going to do forever. You just need to figure out what you're going to do next. And to figure out what
Mm.
you're doing next, I can teach you, and it's not like a secret knowledge. We have a system on Unbound, but there's all kinds of systems. So, it's worth knowing that I'm not claiming any special knowledge here. We can teach you a system of good questions to ask and a framework to ask those in to help you make a wise decision. So ultimately, I'm less interested in you figuring out your career for the next 30 years, and I'm more interested in you figuring out a process that you can use repeatedly to make wise decisions. And then I'd like you to approach that wise decision with a sense of excitement and wonder. And I think then you can be a lot less stressed. You can have a lot more fun. And honestly, if you don't make too many unwise decisions, you'll make a few. But if you don't make too many unwise decisions, there's very little that you're going to do here that you can't recover from.
Mhm.
Start this and don't like it. This is a great time to say, oh, I don't like that. I'm going to do something different. And so I think that just perspective change can be really exciting for people, but I think maybe more exciting, it can be de-stressing for me.
Mm. I love that. And I was immediately thinking of one of my adult children who um, started school, started college with one intended major, immediately thought, I can't do this, and changed majors and went about the process of applying to a more of a specialty program within the college, and then thought, I can't do this.
Right.
And then quit school for some time to work while waiting to apply to a professional program. And this child of ours had so much anxiety about our reaction to that. You know, and it is true. Some scholarship money was lost.
Hmm.
Um, but I wanted to make sure that this child knew that we are 100% in supportive in support of them and this journey, and that we don't expect them to not make any mistakes and not and it wasn't even really a mistake. It was more like I'm figuring this out. So it goes along with what you were saying, I think, so well. And I think our kids need to know that we don't expect them to have this kind of a trajectory toward a career, that I know what it is and I am never varying from it. And, like you're saying, I retire
Right.
um, in that profession doing that work because that's just not our world anymore. And so I appreciate your message so very much. Um, I know you have talked also about how traditional education is built on an answers
Yeah.
based paradigm, but the real world, as you say, operates on a questions based paradigm.
Mhm.
What does that actually look like when a student learns through asking questions instead of memorizing answers? And why would you say that that is such a critical shift in today's technology driven world?
Yeah, I tell people, and I sometimes do speaking live, and I tell the audience, look, you should be skeptical of somebody that stands up here in a sport coat and tells you everything's changed. I mean, I'm generally like almost checking out that point, right? But if you'll give me a second, I think I can prove this to you. And so I tell people, I think education has fundamentally changed in a way that it hasn't throughout human history. And this is what it looks like. Prior to recently, education and information specifically, was hard to come by, right? I
Mm,
mean, like it used to be really hard to come by. But even when I was a young person, which does not seem long ago to me, but it's becoming longer, if I didn't know something and my parents didn't know it, and we didn't have the book in our own house, I had to drive, in my case, 25 minutes to the local library, go through the card catalog, find the book, and then I had to read the information, assuming it was there, and then I had to memorize it, or I had to put it in some file cards and file it somewhere, which, as a 16-year-old male, I was not doing. And so, so that was so. Therefore, there was an easy classification system for effectiveness. Now, I'm not, for all of your audience who care about just education purely for education and knowledge. I'm with you. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about when it comes to practical stuff like getting a job. So, in a professional business type sense, right? For businesses, then, well, speed is always important. And so the more the people you hire have stuff in their head, the faster you can get things done. You don't have to do the research process. And so that's an advantage in business. So therefore, hiring a high school graduate, more stuff in their head, college graduate, more stuff in their head, more letters after your name, more stuff in your head. And so those things end up stacking in a way that's like, okay, I understand why the degrees have, you pay more money for masters, et cetera, and all those kinds of things. Moreover, business at that time ran on a very process thing. If I was going to launch a new product, I was going to spend years doing the market research. I was going to have lots of focus groups. I'm going to put a lot of surveys out there. I'm going to have to set up my factory. I'm going to have to research stuff. And I want to make sure I'm right because I'm going to have a lot of capital expenditure
mm,
before I launch my product or whatever it is. And so that's a slow, deliberative, academic based process. We don't live
mhm,
in that world anymore. So we live in a world where we have instant access to almost the entirety of the world's information. And so now businesses run on iterative decision making. If I'm going to launch a new product, I may launch a website and a marketing campaign before I even have the product and see if people will buy it. If they don't, I'll just say, "Oh, I'll refund your money." And if they do buy it, I'll say, "Well, great. It's 6 weeks till I deliver it," which means I'll then set up the factory and make the product and all those kinds of things. And not only that, we live in a world where technology disrupts things constantly. So now it's not completely about how much knowledge you have in your head. It is important for you to have knowledge in your head. So if you're a high school student listening to this, don't use this as an excuse to get out of math, right? so, but you have to have context to be able to judge the information
mhm,
you're getting. But sorting the information becomes the critical piece, or we
mm,
call it in Unbound QEMCI, being able to quickly and effectively master complicated information, which is just a
mm,
fancy way of saying knowing how to learn. And
mhm,
so that, because what happens is that you run into you have a situation, technology disrupts whatever it is that you're doing. When technology disrupts whatever you're doing and your business is doing, you have to then quickly seek more information, which you can get instantly, sort that information, figure out what information applies to your situation, apply it, and move on. All right. Now, that creates a real problem in traditional education. Traditional education means you get the college degree and you go in that old system. That means that failure is not an option. You have to have a 4.0 to get into a good college. You have to have
mm,
a good
mm,
GPA to get into the good master's school and all that stuff. The
right.
problem is
Yeah.
that kind of system only now exists professionally in higher education. Because when you get to the real world, it used to be, I'm going to apprentice under the vice president or the director. I'm going to do everything he does. I'm going to walk up the ladder. Now the president or the vice president or the director or the manager hires you and says, I don't know what TikTok is. Help me figure it out. I don't know how to use AI. Help me figure it out. Right. And
Yeah.
you go, I don't know either. So I have to try and fail and try and fail and try and fail and try and fail and try and succeed. And then try and fail, try and fail, try and fail, try and succeed. But if you're a traditionally educated person, you're allergic to failure because it's always been catastrophic. If you're
Mm,
operating in the real world, which is everything outside the higher education bubble, failure is the only way we move forward because nobody knows how technology is disrupting things right now. I market a company online and Instagram appears to change its daggone logarithms every other day. And then on top of that, it gives me an option for 4 different AIs to pick through it. And none of us know how that works. And the only way to figure it out is to screw it up 10 times and get it right.
hmm
So that questions-based paradigm means that we tell students all the time, your ability to ask a question is more important than your ability of knowing the answer, which is not to say I don't want you to know the answer.
hmm
When you get an answer, it should put you in a position to ask a better question. And failure should be an option. Not that I want you to fail, but I want you to realize that failing is going to be part of the process of learning, and you should have a toleration for that, a tolerance for that, I should say,
hmm
because that's going to give you the resilience to be able to lean in and to continue to work at solving the problem that you have. And if you're able to do that, boy, not only is that the way the world works, very few people know that's the way the world works, and now you have tremendous advantages and ability to serve and help other people.
Absolutely. And, I was thinking back to, for me, when I made the transition from college to graduate school, I was even struggling because I was on my own, they said, okay, you're going to write your master's thesis and you're going to write a dissertation. And no one had even taught me how to do that.
Right.
So I felt very uncomfortable in that kind of educational environment. And I know that you have talked about that today we have this idea that we want everyone to be comfortable, especially our students, that they should feel really comfortable in their college or university or wherever it is that they are learning. But you are saying that it's actually the struggle that strengthens us. And I agree with you, but can you talk more about how you put students in a position to intentionally struggle with a real world project?
Yeah. So one of the things that I've noticed is that in traditional education, because of the nature of the things we just talked about, most things are simulations. And that makes sense. And in some cases, that's really important. I mean, I really want you to simulate building a bridge if you're an engineer before you build one incorrectly that I might drive across. So, I mean, there are certainly disciplines where this makes total sense, right? But it is then it has this sense of unreality because it's not real. And so failure has less of a potential problem, and success is not easy to gauge because it's more success by the subjective judgment of the professor that's teaching you. Now, I'm not saying that has no value. I'm just saying in a world where we're constantly having to learn how to do new things, that does not convey it might teach you the process of doing that thing, but it does not convey and teach the skills that you need to do new things. And as a quick example for that, just 2 years ago, I had a student who finished 90 credits with Unbound, which we can help you earn, and as finishing their final year at university, and they sent me a screenshot and said, "Look at this." And it was in a great school that probably most of your listeners have heard of, that has a great reputation in a marketing class. And the textbook example, meaning in the textbook being taught by the professor of a social media platform, was MySpace. But think about this. The professor, when they left whatever marketing world he was in and became a professor, MySpace was the thing, and they haven't had to adapt since then. He's been
Mm,
teaching a class ever since that has MySpace held up because there's no consequences for that. So the class was
mm,
learning great things about how to run MySpace, of course, in a world that doesn't make any difference at all, right? And
mhm,
there's thousands of examples like that. And,
mhm,
and so instead, we wanted to say when we did Unbound was like, well, let's make the core of the education something else. If traditional education, the core is the GPA, I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying that measures a certain level of academic achievement that may or may not transfer practically to the real world. What would transfer practically to the real world? Well, real world stuff. So if you're a student at Unbound, and the program's designed so you do 1, 2, or 3 years, but if you do all 4 years, the primary thing we ask you to do in terms of your work, your learning, is that you can take some classes, you can take some accredited classes. I just mentioned you can earn college credits and transfer those, and they will have GPAs attached to them, so you're not going to escape GPA entirely necessarily. You can also go through our certificate program and skip all of that, but no matter what you do, first-year students have to do a project where they take an idea from an idea to reality. Second-year students have to take somebody else's project somebody else's idea from an idea to reality. And third-year students have to work in a team where they take an idea from an idea to reality. And yes, lots of second-year students are working on third-year student projects. I mean, there's a teamwork aspect to that. I want you to succeed, but I don't care if you fail, but you will, because there'll be real world consequences for it. If you decide to run a marathon and you quit, you can learn a lot from that. You also have to deal with the reality that you quit the marathon, right?
Hmm.
And so all of a sudden now what happens is that as you're learning things in the classroom, as you're learning things in the things that we teach at our events, you're saying, oh, I can use this for that. I can use this for that. I can transfer this real thing. And you're going through the excitement of starting, the messy middle where you're like, I haven't started and I'm not done. And then the exhilaration of either finishing or the terror of failing, all of which translates immediately to real life because that's how it works.
Yeah.
And so two things happen. One, we get to be part of a lot of really cool projects, and that's really fun to see students all over the country doing all these wild things. And we're like, hey, we kind of at least prompted that. But secondly, we get to see students go, oh, and the light turn on. Like, time management, task management are the most important things in any career. You don't really have to do that until you have to do that. When we have a project that says it has to be big, it has to meet these requirements, your peers are going to judge you on it, which means they're way tougher than we ever are. And now the deadline's coming. Time management, task management becomes real instantly. And it's that reality check that drives stress, which drives
Hmm.
learning.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, is it comfortable? Almost never. Is it effective? Almost always. And that's the exciting part.
Right. Wow. I mean, that just sounds so impressive, exciting, and scary at the same time. It
That's and,
really
and
does.
if students came in with that attitude, I'd be like, yes, I want you to be a little scared. I want you to be impressed and think you're doing something impressive, and I want you overall to be excited because it will be. And there's no excitement without some level of fear, right? So.
Ab- for sure. For sure. Okay, so you have talked about your students, the process that they go through. You have a different definition of success
Yes.
for your students that doesn't involve fame or money, how much money you're making, or how much power you have in your position or your role. So, what is your definition of success that is really countercultural right now?
So this is the second time I'll tell your audience, hold on, because I get really wound up about this. So I'll try to edit myself down a little bit. Um, so this is coming from me watching, like some people run an auto repair shop and they're really good at fixing cars. I've got to spend most of the last 3 decades watching young adults transition from being a young adult to being a full-fledged adult. And so there are definitely some themes that I've had the privilege of being paid to watch and learn from. Okay. And so this is the big one. As parents, teachers, educators, whoever has influence over young people, we sell young people, we want you to be successful. That is an honorable thing. I mean, that's a good thing. We definitely don't want them to be failures, right? The problem is the culture has crept in without us thinking about it. And so when we say, I want you to be successful, enhanced by a social media saturated world, that either explicitly or implicitly is telling young people, and to be successful means obtaining some measure of fame, fortune, or power.
Hmm.
Now, here's the problem. Fame, fortune, and power at noticeable levels are interesting because it's rare,
Hmm.
right? I mean, there's not a lot of super rich, super powerful, super famous people. That's why it's intriguing to us. But social media makes it look like everybody has that opportunity.
Hmm.
So we end up inadvertently telling students, hey, to be successful, you need to obtain some of this. And so I have a problem with that because, first of all, from a practical standpoint, a young person graduates from high school saying, I want to change the world. And this is how we couch it, especially in the church. You're not the leader of tomorrow, you're the leader of today. And we get all excited about this stuff, right? And a kid comes charging out of high school saying, I'm going to change the world. And then 4 or 5 years in, they're like, wow, it is, I can barely pay my rent, let alone a mortgage. I'm trying to figure these things out. And so that, it finds out those things are really hard. And so when they run to, I'm not worried about hard things, but when the reality strikes, here's the process. That optimism fast turns to cynicism. Like, hey, I'm not, and then it turns into despair, to bitterness. So cynicism first, like, I don't believe this stuff anymore, and then it's bitterness, like, I think you sold me a bill of goods, and then often it can be despair, like, I don't even care
Mhm.
anymore. And so you have these quiet quitting, high suicide rates, all those things, which I'm not saying is all related to this, but there is a root there, right? And I'm
Yeah.
saying, look, there's got to be a better way. And it has to be with us deliberately changing that definition of success. So, yeah, Unbound, we say we train young adults to thrive. And honestly, I picked that word because it has a
Mm.
positive connotation, but people don't know what it means. So it gives us a chance to define it, right? And so I can go a step further and say, no, look, I have no problems with you being rich, famous, or powerful. Like, in fact, that would be great, right? I have a problem with you pursuing that as your goal, because I think if you do that and you find it, even if you find it, it will be empty, right? And so,
Mhm.
and also, I think you'll have a harder time finding it than you think. So let me
Mhm.
teach you some other things, and then if fame, fortune, power comes along, that's fine. But now you know how to handle them. So I think
Mhm.
that if I can teach you to do these things, you're going to live a rich, fulfilling, satisfying, impactful life. And that is, to thrive means to accept full responsibility for your life, to prioritize relationships,
Mhm.
serve others by being extraordinary at ordinary things, which means you don't get a chance to be lazy here. I want you to be excellent starting right now. Are you going to do something ordinary next 5 minutes? Be extraordinary at it. All of a sudden, your entire life is saturated with an opportunity for excellence. To be able to create value, which is different than earning money, so you understand something a little deeper. To live resiliently, which from our perspective is to understand that you live in a broken, busted, sinful world, but you live in light of a hope that eclipses that, in light
Mhm.
of eternity, for the glory of God.
Mm.
And if we can have you expose those ideas, understand that in a practical sense, then I feel very confident that you'll be able to do the low level successful things we need you to do. Earn enough money to feed your family, be famous enough to get a job,
Mhm.
be powerful enough to have influence on people around you. I mean, those kinds of things. But you'll also have a deep, rich satisfaction of knowing what you're doing matters. And then you don't have to worry and stress out about having that level of, noticeable fame, fortune, and power, which is often hard to obtain and comes with more consequences than most people think.
Mm. For sure. I mean, I just felt like that was most likely a message for all of our listeners, and not just something that we want to share with our young people. So, as you have been speaking with me today, I just keep thinking about how your homeschool education has influenced you, just the way that you think, the way that you have been using your life to serve others. And so I would love to know how you think your homeschool education yourself has shaped the way that you are parenting and educating your own kids. And then I would love to know how you think it has influenced the way that you run Unbound.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's so much fun to respond to. I was such an enormous debt to my parents and my
Mm.
in-laws, because for us, homeschooling our children was pretty natural. For them, I'm still not sure why in the world my mom decided to homeschool me or how she learned about it.
Mm.
Pre-internet, all those kinds of things. But I'm sure of two things, three things. My entire identity was shaped by my parents passing on their faith to me, their decision to homeschool us, and not having a TV. So those
Mm.
things are, and the homeschooling thing was really central to all of that. And I tell people, it's very interesting as a homeschool person. It appears to me that the vast majority of things that stress out parents and people, and especially parents when they talk with their children, is whatever cultural trend is destructive at the time. Now, I actually think cultural trends of the time are almost always destructive because we live in a broken world, right? So, I mean, we have some interesting, challenging ones now, but we had some interesting, challenging ones at other times. And frankly, I'm kind of glad that some of the ones we're dealing with now aren't like the ones we dealt with in the past, right? I mean, for all the problems of our world, the extreme racism of the 20s and 30s is not. I'm not saying we're perfect, but that's not what we're dealing with. I'm
Mhm.
glad we don't have to deal with the Black Death, and I'm glad we
Mhm,
don't have to
mhm.
deal with, say, the kinds of problems people in Nazi Germany might have had to deal with. I mean, so
Mhm.
there's a time and place for all those things, and so every generation has its challenges, and ours are not small. But at the same time, we can find something to be grateful about the fact that they're not as big as some others, right? And so what homeschooling did for me is that I always see those things as optional. It's like when I see kids like, oh, kids these days, they're so addicted to their phones. It never occurred to me that it was necessary for me to buy my 12-year-old a phone. I never even felt the slightest bit of pressure to do that. And so, when you opt out of something
Mm.
as fundamental as I'm not sending my kids to public school, then you go around and go like, actually, there's some other things I'd like to opt out of as well. I mean, we're not going to watch TV all the time. I'm not going to give my 12-year-old a phone. We're not going to do video games. And none of those things were like a real struggle. They were kind of like, oh, I'll look at that. Do we want it? Do we not? We don't? Okay, we're not doing it. And
Mhm.
and so I think that was a fundamental piece. The other piece that I think, and this is where I would like to really encourage your listeners, every homeschool parent has a deep-seated insecurity that they think will be solved by their child going to school, going to college.
Mm.
Because what they go is like, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. Oh, they got in with a scholarship. Take that, neighbor who judged me all those years. What I mean? In the most Christian way possible, I'd like to stick it in the eye of all my relatives who said that you're going to ruin my kids. And so you have this kind of secret insecurity, like because now look, I'm gonna take that insecurity and I'm gonna stomp that nerve and twist it, because your kids don't really know how to do algebra. They didn't really figure out, insert whatever your weakness is, right?
Mm. Mhm.
Now, maybe that was problematic in a answers-based paradigm years ago, although it didn't hurt me any, so I'm not so sure about that. But let me tell you, it has almost no bearing in today's world, because you know what you have to do instead by the very fact that you are one or two people teaching your children. And you don't know the answers to everything. By default, the only way you can educate your children is by teaching them a questions-based paradigm. At some point, they have to accept responsibility for their education, and they have to figure things out that you can't teach them. Well, that ends up being the primary transferable skill that changes everything. And so, I had a young man one time, and I said, he was coming through our program and he was earning credits and he was doing a lot of credit by exam. And I said, what's the hardest thing you had to do? He said, teach myself calculus. I said, what's the best thing about our program? He says, you taught me how to teach myself calculus. Like, he's like, I don't think there's anything I can't learn at this point.
Mm.
And that is an incredibly powerful skill. And that is at the very heart of homeschooling. Doesn't matter what curriculum you use, doesn't matter how you're doing it. At some root level, you have to be doing it that way. And I just want to tell you, from somebody who bases my reputation and my future financial success on preparing people to move into the marketplace. At Unbound, if you do 3 years with us, we guarantee you'll get a job that pays professional level salaries or will refund all 3 years of your tuition. That means I have to make sure that I am equipping students with the skills that they need to go into the marketplace. And so I have a high degree of confidence about what those skills are. And I can tell you the fundamental one is having that questions-based paradigm. And as a homeschooler, you may never have heard those words before, but you're doing that by default. And that's what my
Mhm.
mom did for me. That's what my in-laws did for my wife. That's what we, even unintentionally, did for our children. And that's a major distinctive that gives them a huge advantage in the kind of world that we actually live in.
Mm. Well, I am so intrigued. Unfortunately, I don't have any more kids to educate after high school, or
Congratulations.
I'd be talking to you all about the details of this. So please tell us how our listeners can find out more about Unbound and how they can connect with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So 3 things. First, of course, you can go to beunbound.us. That's beunbound.us. It's a website and has all things a website ought to have. Secondly, if you'd like to see what it looks like, you can search for Be Unbound on YouTube and social media and those kinds of things. And of course, we do a podcast as well and all that kind of fun stuff. And then third, don't be afraid to talk to us. And I say that because there's always this terror. Like, if I talk to a real person, they're going to do some sort of mind judo flip and I'm going to end up spending money I didn't mean to spend. I just want to let you know that that would be terrible for us, right? Like,
Mm.
we run a different kind of education program, and it has to be connected to the people that would benefit most from us. So I'm less interested in selling you anything, and I'm more interested in hearing genuinely what you is that your young person, or you, if you're the young person, wants to do. And then if I can help you, I need you to understand how. And then if those two things match, then we'll work on the judo mind trick, right? Then we'll get to that point. But initially, call us and say, I'm not even sure if this works. Some of our most fun conversations, like, nope, it's not going to work. But
Mhm.
since I do this every day, here's 4 things I can send you to that will work. And the final piece is we're not an empire and we're not huge. So you can go to beunbound.us. And if you want to talk to me or even disagree with what I said, you can just ask anybody you get in contact with and say, give me Jonathan's number. They'll give you my cell phone number. And I tell my
Wow.
students this all the time. You can call me anytime because when I don't want to talk to you, I just turn it off because that whole on homeschooled background, right? Like I was like, I don't think need this
Yes.
thing to ring at 2 o'clock in the morning. Everybody who's really important to me already knows my home phone number. So I don't give that one out. Turn the cell phone off when I don't want to talk to people. So I'll be happy to talk to you and answer any questions you have.
Well, thank you so much for that. So I do have one more question that I think maybe my audience has too, and that is your program online or is it on site?
What a great question. Yes. Um, so we run what
Okay.
we call a hybrid education program. We do deliver content online, and we do that deliberately. And I tell students, I don't care where you do the program, and that's kind of the cool thing. But I
Mhm.
think most people underestimate the power of being local. So if you're
Mhm.
in a local community, I want you to remain embedded in your local community. I'm not saying it's a requirement. I'm not making any moral claim to you to do that. I'm just saying that that proximity principle, the people that know you best, that you already have
Mm.
relationships with, probably have more advantages than the culture tends to tell you that they do. And so I want you to give you that option to remain local if you want to. If you want to travel someplace else, you can still do Unbound. But I don't think you can form real relationships or learn the kind of skills I need to teach you unless you are in person. And so 4 times a year in our Ascend program, which is our post-high school program, we have high school programs and post-high school. But in Ascend, 4 times a year, you get tickets, you fly to a location, you spend a week in a very intense experience. And through that process, you will build lifelong relationships. I mean that deliberately and literally. If lifelong is, let's see, 16 years, I guess is the track record I have in terms of watching those relationships go. And you'll connect to people. You'll have an incredible community, the likes of which you've never seen. And that process of doing the kinds of challenging things that we do in person will solidify all those lessons you're learning theoretically online. That's where you actually get to do the real stuff. So it's hybrid in the sense you can remain local, but by the time you're
Mhm.
done, you'll have a national network. And literally,
Oh.
our students can cross the country and never take a hotel room because they'll stay with Unbound families
Oh.
the whole way across. So
Well, I'm so glad I asked that question too.
me too. I'm glad to have a chance to explain it. So.
Well, this has really and truly been a joy. Thank you so much for sharing all of this with our listeners. And I am excited to share this episode with them. And I hope that it encourages more families to consider Unbound, or at least the model of education that you are advocating for. So thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. I'd be delighted to meet anybody that's interested in Unbound. And I'd be just as delighted, maybe more so, if the things that we talked about today were able to grant people some more perspective and help them be able to navigate these things a little better. Thanks for what you do, Melanie. Anybody that is dedicated to bringing sanity to the homeschool space is somebody who's doing some really important work. So I'm deeply appreciative. Thank you.
Reviewing this conversation with Jonathan, one thing struck me. We're asking our kids to decide their career for the next 30 years and borrow 6 figures to make it happen. Jonathan's approach is so much more gracious. You don't have to know forever. Just figure out what's next. Be okay with trying, failing, and adjusting. That's how the real world actually works. And here's the most encouraging part for those of us who homeschool. We're already teaching our kids this way. We don't just teach our kids facts, but how to learn. We give them real world projects. We let them struggle and figure things out. If you're interested in learning more about Unbound or how to prepare your kids for life after homeschooling, visit the show notes page at homeschoolsanity.com/lifeafter. And if you can attend a great homeschool convention this year, be sure to grab your ticket for even more encouragement at homeschoolsanity.com/GHC26. Have a happy homeschool week. This has been a production of the Ultimate Homeschool Radio Network.